The night my husband tried to throw me out of my own life, he made one fatal mistake. He thought I was still the same woman he married 25 years ago. He was wrong. The champagne glasses were still clinking when Daniel stood up. The soft golden lights reflected off the crystal chandelier, and laughter filled the room. Our closest friends, business partners, even a few distant relatives were gathered in our penthouse, celebrating what everyone believed was a beautiful milestone, our 25th wedding anniversary. I remember standing there in a deep navy dress, smiling politely, accepting compliments, playing my role perfectly. The devoted wife. The graceful hostess. The woman who had stood beside her husband through everything. But something felt off. Daniel had been distant for months. Cold. Calculated. Like he was rehearsing something in his head, waiting for the right moment to perform it. I just didn't know that moment would come in front of everyone. He tapped his glass lightly with a spoon. The room slowly quieted. "I'd like to say a few words," he announced, flashing that familiar charming smile that had once made me fall for him. People turned toward him, expecting something romantic. Something emotional. Maybe a tribute to our years together. I looked at him too, holding my breath without even realizing it. "For 25 years, he began, we've built a life together." A few guests nodded, smiling warmly. I felt a small sense of relief. Maybe I had been overthinking everything. Maybe this night would pass peacefully. Then he continued. 25 years is enough." The air shifted. At first, I thought I misheard him. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere in the room, like someone assumed it was a joke. But Daniel didn't laugh. "I want something different now," he said, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. "I want someone younger. Someone who matches the life I have today." My fingers tightened around my glass. The silence grew heavier, suffocating. "And as for you," he looked directly at me. "No hesitation. No guilt. I want you out of the apartment tomorrow." It felt like the floor disappeared beneath my feet. For a brief second, I couldn't hear anything. The world blurred. Faces turned toward me, some shocked, some uncomfortable, some pretending not to listen. 25 years. Reduced to a public dismissal. I should have cried. I should have run. That's what the old me would have done. But instead, something else happened. Something inside me snapped into place. Calm. Clear. Dangerously calm. I slowly placed my glass down on the table beside me. My heartbeat steadied, not racing, but aligning. Like every second was suddenly under my control again. Daniel kept talking, as if he was delivering a business presentation instead of ending a marriage. "I've already made arrangements," he added. "This is better for both of us. Better for both of us." That line almost made me smile. He really believed that. Or maybe he just needed everyone else to believe it. I looked around the room. Our guests avoided my eyes. A few women looked at me with pity. A few men looked at Daniel with quiet approval, like he had done something bold. No one stepped in. No one questioned him. And that's when I realized something important. If I didn't speak now, this moment would define me forever. I would become the woman who was discarded. The woman who left quietly. The woman who lost everything. But that wasn't my story. Not anymore. I reached for the microphone. My movement was slow, deliberate. Daniel noticed. For the first time that night, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Good." I turned toward the guests, holding the microphone steadily in my hand. For a second, I said nothing. Silence has power. And I wanted them to feel it. Then I spoke. "Thank you, Daniel," I said, my voice smooth, controlled, carrying across the entire room. He blinked, clearly not expecting that. I continued. "Thank you for finally saying it out loud." A few guests shifted in their seats. "You see," I said, glancing around the room, "for months, I've been watching my husband slowly walk out of this marriage, long before tonight. Daniel's jaw tightened. But what surprises me, I added, turning my gaze back to him, is that he thinks he's the one making decisions here. A ripple of confusion spread across the room. I took a step forward. You said you want me out of the apartment tomorrow, I repeated calmly. He straightened his posture, regaining some of his confidence. Yes. That's exactly what I said. I nodded slightly. Then I smiled. A real smile. The kind he hadn't seen in years. That's going to be a little difficult, I said. A pause. Because the apartment is mine. The words landed like a shockwave. Complete silence. Daniel's expression froze. For the first time since he stood up, he had nothing to say. I let the moment stretch. Let everyone absorb it. Bought and paid for, I continued, my tone steady, almost conversational. In my name. Years ago. Before your last investment nearly collapsed. A few heads turned toward him. Whispers started. His confidence cracked. I stepped closer, lowering the microphone slightly but not enough for anyone to miss what I said next. So if anyone is leaving tomorrow, I paused just enough to let the tension build. It won't be me. Gasps echoed softly through the room. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. I could see it in his eyes now. Panic. Real panic. Because he hadn't expected resistance. He hadn't expected truth. And he definitely hadn't expected me. I raised the microphone again. And since we're being honest tonight, I added, my voice now carrying a sharper edge, maybe it's time everyone here knew exactly what kind of man you've become. The room leaned in. Daniel took a step toward me. That's enough. I didn't move. No, I said quietly. Not yet. Because this was just the beginning. And for the first time in 25 years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. Daniel swallowed hard, his hand gripping the edge of the table like it was a lifeline. He had rehearsed this speech, this moment, and yet he looked completely unprepared for my response. I could almost hear the gears in his head spinning, trying to figure out how to regain control of a room he no longer commanded. I adjusted the microphone slightly, letting the subtle shift catch his attention. The guests leaned forward, sensing the tension crackling in the air. I didn't rush. Every second mattered. Every pause was ammunition. You've always liked to think you were the smart one, I began, my voice even, calm, but with that edge that made everyone sit a little straighter. The one who could manipulate situations, bend people to your will. But tonight, I let the words linger, letting their weight sink in. You forgot one thing. I am not someone you can manipulate anymore. The room had gone completely silent now. Some people's hands covered their mouths, others froze mid-toast. Everyone was waiting, not knowing exactly what would come next. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, slightly shaking. Sarah, he said, using my name as if it could hold some power over me. But it didn't. Not anymore. I am done standing silently while you try to rewrite our history, I said firmly, stepping closer. Done pretending that your desires or whims dictate my life. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the disbelief. He had built this facade of confidence, thinking he was untouchable in front of friends, family, colleagues. But for the first time, the veil was gone. I'd built a life here, I continued, letting my words echo through the spacious apartment. A life that I own, a life that I nurtured, and yes, a life that you benefited from. But make no mistake, this life is mine. And tonight, everyone is witnessing the truth. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked around, hoping someone would intervene, someone would rescue him from the embarrassment he now faced. But no one did. The room was still, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning, the soft clinking of glasses left untouched. Everyone was watching. I let the silence stretch, letting the impact of my words settle. Then I leaned slightly, my voice lowering, so that only those paying close attention could hear the next lines, but still loud enough to fill the room. You may want someone younger, someone you think can be molded, controlled. But I am not that person. I am not anyone's idea of convenience or fantasy. And trying to erase me, dismiss me, or humiliate me, well, Daniel, that is not only foolish, it's dangerous. A few guests gasped softly. Some exchanged glances. I could feel the electricity in the air, the collective realization that this was not going to end quietly. I stepped even closer, letting the movement catch him off guard. He flinched slightly, and I smiled just enough to let him know I wasn't backing down. You've spent 25 years under the illusion that you were untouchable, I said, letting each word drop like a hammer. Tonight, you're finally facing the consequences of your arrogance. Not just me, Daniel, but everyone here is seeing the truth. The real you. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. He opened his mouth, closed it, and for a long moment, nothing happened. The energy in the room shifted. It wasn't just tension anymore, it was raw attention, anticipation. Every eye was on us. I've lived quietly, supporting you, tolerating your moods, watching as you put your wants above our family, above me, I continued, my tone unwavering. And yet I stayed. But tonight, I let that word linger like fire in the room. I will not stay silent. Some of our closest friends looked shocked, unable to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the force standing before them. Some colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that they were witnessing a private war made public. I paused, took a deep breath, and let the microphone's subtle hum fill the air for a second. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to perform. The truth had power all on its own. And for everyone here, I added, looking directly at the assembled guests, let me be clear. You will not witness me bowing. You will not see me retreating into the shadows. You will see me stand, unbroken, unapologetic, and in control of my life. Because that is the reality you all need to understand tonight. Daniel's face shifted, a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief. He had never seen me like this. He had never imagined I could speak with such authority, such clarity, in front of everyone. And I wasn't done. You may have thought 25 years gave you power over me, I said softly, leaning slightly, letting my words slice through the tension like a blade. But what it really did was make me stronger. Smarter. More aware. And tonight, you are witnessing that strength firsthand. The guests were now completely silent, leaning in to hear every word. Some were nodding subtly, some were frozen. But all were watching. Daniel took a step back, almost instinctively, like he was realizing he was finally cornered. He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off without raising my voice. This apartment, this life, and every decision I make moving forward, are mine. And nothing you say, nothing you threaten, will ever change that again. I let the last sentence hang in the room, powerful, deliberate, undeniable. He could not interrupt. He could not take back his words. He had underestimated me, and now everyone was seeing the real story, the story that had been hidden behind polite smiles, quiet endurance, and years of unseen strength. And in that moment, I knew, I was no longer the woman standing quietly beside a man who thought he owned me. I was the woman commanding the room, commanding the narrative, and commanding the life he had tried to claim as his own. And this was only the beginning. Make sure to tell in the comments where you are listening from. The room remained suspended in a tense silence. I could feel every heartbeat around me, the subtle shifting of feet, the nervous clearing of throats. But I did not waver. I was anchored in my own power, and everyone could see it. Daniel opened his mouth once more, like a cornered animal, searching for any words that could restore control. But I anticipated him. I had spent months watching, planning, calculating. And now, at the perfect moment, I let the next wave of truth roll through. You've spent your life believing that appearances matter more than reality, I said, my tone calm but sharp. That smiling in public can cover up neglect, arrogance, and selfishness. But tonight, all that illusion has crumbled. I could see the flicker of recognition in the eyes of our guests. Some of them had started piecing it together, realizing that the man they thought they knew, the charming, confident Daniel, was far more fragile than they had believed. I walked slowly across the room, microphone in hand, my gaze never leaving him. 25 years, Daniel, I continued, and you think a speech, a dramatic announcement, a little public humiliation will erase everything we've built together? That's not how life works. That's not how respect works. That's not how love, even your version of it, works. He tried to interject, but I raised a hand ever so slightly, enough to silence him. No interruptions, I said softly, deliberately, letting the words hit harder than a shout. Because this isn't about your feelings tonight. This is about truth. My truth. And everyone here is seeing it clearly. The whispers had grown louder now. People were exchanging subtle glances, unsure whether to intervene, unsure how far this confrontation would go. But I wasn't intimidated. I didn't need anyone's approval. The power was mine. I had reclaimed it. You may have thought that youth, charm, and money give you dominance, I said, stepping closer to him. But none of that gives you authority over me. None of it ever did. And trying to assert control in front of all these witnesses only exposes your weakness. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked as if he might explode, yet he held himself back, realizing that every word he spoke now would make him look worse. And that hesitation was my advantage. I paused, letting my words sink into the room like stones dropped into still water. The silence was electric, heavy, full of tension. And then I spoke again, softer this time, but no less powerful. You may have underestimated me for decades, I said, my eyes locking on his. But underestimate me no longer. I've learned. I've grown. I've seen through your masks. And tonight, your masks are falling apart in front of everyone you hoped would admire you, support you, or defend you. A subtle shiver ran through Daniel, almost imperceptible, but I noticed it. The arrogance, the bravado, the confident performance, it was all cracking. I smiled faintly, just enough to let him see that I was aware of every fracture, every hesitation. And to everyone here, I continued, my voice rising slightly, commanding attention, let me make this clear. You are witnessing not a breakdown, not a scandal, not a private fight. You are witnessing liberation. Strength. Truth. Power that has been ignored, dismissed, and underestimated for far too long. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the woman standing before them was no longer someone they could categorize or control with polite smiles or subtle judgments. They could feel the energy in the room, the authority I had taken for myself, and it was undeniable. Daniel swallowed hard, trying once more to find his footing. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him finish. I moved closer, letting my presence dominate the space, letting my words fill the air with inevitability. And Daniel, I said, slowing my pace, letting each word linger like deliberate strikes, this is not just about a speech. It is not just about an announcement. It is about reality. You may want someone younger. Someone more obedient. Someone who will bend to your desires. But I am not that person. I have never been that person. And anyone who thinks otherwise is about to learn a very costly lesson. I felt the energy in the room shift even further. Guests were leaning forward, some whispering quietly, others sitting frozen, unable to look away. Every eye was on us. And every eye could see the stark contrast between the man who wanted to control and the woman who had taken her power back. Daniel tried to move, to interject, to salvage his dominance. But I had rehearsed this, anticipated this. I raised my voice just slightly, enough to carry across the room without yelling. No more pretenses. No more illusions. No more thinking that your plans, your whims, your arrogance can dictate my life. This ends now. I let a pause stretch, letting the gravity of my words settle into every corner of the room. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel Daniel's frustration, his fear, and his disbelief all at once. Then I leaned forward, my eyes piercing into his, and said the words I had been waiting to say for years. The apartment is mine. The life I built is mine. And the respect, dignity, and power I claim from this moment forward are mine. Not yours. Never yours. A few guests gasped softly, some nodded subtly in silent support, while others remained frozen in shock. Daniel's face had turned pale, his carefully constructed image of control crumbling under the weight of truth. I stepped back slightly, letting the room absorb the full impact of my declaration. The microphone was still in my hand, my posture steady, my eyes unwavering. And in that moment, I knew beyond any doubt, this confrontation, this declaration, was not an end. It was a turning point. Because tonight, the woman everyone thought they knew was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, sharper, and fully awake to the reality that had been denied for far too long. And Daniel? He was seeing her for the first time. The real me. And there was no going back. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. The room seemed to hold its breath, every guest frozen in that instant, feeling the gravity of what had just unfolded. I lowered the microphone slightly, letting the subtle click of my hand movement emphasize the silence. Daniel's face was a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief, and I relished the sight, not in malice, but as the final acknowledgement that I was no longer invisible in my own life. I began pacing slowly, deliberately, allowing every step to punctuate the authority I had claimed. 25 years, I said, my voice steady, commanding attention. And you think you can erase someone's existence with a few words, a little ego, a bit of public theatrics? Daniel opened his mouth. I raised a finger slightly, signaling him to stop. He hesitated, realizing he could not interject without undermining himself further. Good. He had no idea how much control he had just lost. You have built your life on assumptions, I continued, looking around the room, letting my gaze sweep across the silent faces of our friends, family, and colleagues. Assumptions that you are indispensable, that your voice dictates the narrative, that your desires define reality. But assumptions are fragile, Daniel. And tonight, yours have shattered in front of everyone. He swallowed hard, his jaw tight, trying to salvage something, anything, that would restore his crumbling facade. But it was gone. Every attempt to regain dominance was futile. I stopped, turning slightly, letting the spotlight of my calm authority rest on him. You may have thought power meant control, intimidation, or fear. But true power, real power, Daniel, comes from clarity, self-respect, and the courage to stand firm when everything around you is trying to bend you. The guests were leaning forward now, captivated by my words, unsure of how far this confrontation would go but unable to look away. The air felt electric, charged with the tension of revelation. Daniel tried again. Sarah, this is ridiculous. You're making a scene. I smiled faintly, almost kindly, letting him see the futility of his attempt. Making a scene? I echoed. No, Daniel. I'm reclaiming my life. That is not a scene. That is truth. And truth, unlike your theatrics, cannot be denied, ignored, or silenced. I took a deliberate step closer to him, my presence filling the space, making it clear who was in control now. You see, every manipulation, every condescending remark, every attempt to make me feel small, it's all part of the past. And the past ends tonight. The room was still. Even the smallest noises, the faint clinking of glasses, the soft rustle of dresses, had stopped. Everyone was watching, witnessing the transformation of the woman they had known quietly into someone commanding the room with undeniable authority. You've always underestimated me, I said, letting the words land firmly, with precision. Underestimated my strength, my intellect, my patience. And tonight, Daniel, you are seeing what you never wanted to see, a woman who cannot be controlled, who cannot be silenced, and who will not be dismissed. I glanced around the room again, making eye contact with a few guests, letting them understand the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just a personal confrontation, it was a declaration, a warning, a testament to the resilience and power that had been dormant for too long. And let's be clear, I said, turning back to Daniel, my voice calm but carrying an unshakable force, this apartment, this life, the choices I make, they belong to me. Not to you. Not to anyone who thinks they can impose their whims on my existence. Mine. Every bit of it. I let the words hang in the air. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line, and I saw his confidence cracking further. For decades, he had believed that appearances, charm, and influence gave him dominance. But dominance over me had always been an illusion. And now, the illusion was shattered. I took a slow breath, letting the pause reinforce the weight of my declaration. You may have believed that years together gave you control, that familiarity was power. But you were wrong. Time does not grant ownership. Courage, self-respect, and clarity grant power. And tonight, I possess them all. Daniel tried to speak again, to assert something, anything, but I didn't let him. I raised my hand slightly, signaling calm but final authority. No more interruptions, no more excuses, no more empty words, I said, my voice measured but sharp. The reality is clear. The boundaries are set. And everyone here is witnessing that reality. A few guests shifted in their seats, nodding subtly, quietly recognizing the strength and truth in my words. Others remained still, unsure how to react, but captivated nonetheless. The air was thick with tension and recognition. You may have thought this night would humiliate me, I said, stepping closer, letting my words cut through the space between us, but instead, it has revealed you. Your arrogance, your weakness, your inability to understand what true partnership, or even respect, means. And that revelation, Daniel, is far more powerful than any speech you could have given. I let another pause stretch, letting the weight of my words settle across the room. Every eye was on him. Every breath seemed synchronized with the impact of my declarations. And tonight, I said, lowering my voice slightly, you see me as I truly am, unafraid, unwavering, and fully awake to my own strength. And that, Daniel, is something you cannot undo, control, or diminish. The tension was palpable. Guests leaned in, some whispering to one another, others watching in stunned silence. Daniel's attempts at control had failed, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and powerless in a room that once revered him. I straightened, holding the microphone firmly, letting the finality of my presence resonate in the room. This is not just about an apartment, or about years spent together, or about your whims. This is about life. Mine. And from this moment forward, the life I lead, the choices I make, and the respect I command, belong to me. Not you. Not anyone. I paused again, letting the words sink fully. Daniel opened his mouth once more, but the room, the energy, and the undeniable truth of my declaration had rendered him silent. And in that silence, I felt the first taste of liberation, the first real surge of power I had taken back in decades. This confrontation was no longer just about Daniel. It was about claiming every moment I had ever allowed to be stolen. And the world, at least this room, would witness it all. Make sure to tell in the comments where you are listening from. I felt a quiet surge of satisfaction as I scanned the faces around me. Shock, admiration, uncertainty, each reaction was a testament to the truth I had just revealed. Daniel, however, remained frozen in the center of the room, his once commanding presence reduced to something fragile, something human, finally exposed. I moved slowly, deliberately, allowing every step to reinforce my authority. Tonight, I said, letting my voice fill the space with precision, is not about anger, revenge, or spectacle. It's about clarity. It's about showing that silence, patience, and endurance do not equate to weakness. They build strength. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, as though trying to size me up, to understand what had changed. What had shifted. But I didn't wait for him to act. I spoke to everyone, making sure the room felt the full weight of my declaration. For years, I continued, I have tolerated subtle dismissals, hidden criticisms, and quiet manipulations. And while I may have stayed outwardly composed, I have never been powerless. I have always known my worth, even when you doubted it, Daniel. Even when the world seemed to overlook it. The guests were leaning in now, some nodding ever so slightly, others visibly captivated by the unflinching confidence radiating from me. Daniel shifted, his hands tightening slightly at his sides, realizing that every word I spoke weakened his carefully constructed persona further. "You thought a dramatic statement tonight would define me, reduce me, make me retreat into shadows," I said, stepping closer to him, my gaze unwavering. "But you were wrong. What defines me is not your opinion, your whim, or your fleeting desire. What defines me is my own strength, my choices, and my ability to stand fully in my power." I paused, letting the tension build, letting every guest feel the gravity of the moment. Daniel's jaw tightened, his lips pressed together, the color rising slightly in his face. He was angry, yes, but also scared, finally aware that the game he thought he controlled had shifted irrevocably. "And let me make this clear," I continued, my voice steady, unwavering, deliberate. "This apartment, this life, the respect I command, the boundaries I set, all of it belongs to me. Not you. Not anyone else. And from this moment on, I will make every decision for myself, without fear, hesitation, or compromise." Some guests shifted in their seats, impressed by the force and conviction in my words. Others exchanged looks, perhaps realizing that the quiet, patient woman they had known had transformed into someone unstoppable. Daniel's eyes flickered, searching for an escape, an argument, a defense. But none came. All that remained was the undeniable truth I had presented, and the clarity of the authority I had claimed. "You may have thought your youth, charm, or past accomplishments gave you control over me," I said, my voice rising slightly with emphasis, "but none of that grants power over someone who knows her own strength. None of it." I let the words hang in the air, giving them time to settle into the room, giving Daniel time to recognize the futility of any rebuttal. The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible, as if the room itself was holding its breath. "And now, for everyone here," I added, my gaze sweeping across the guests, "let this night be a reminder that respect cannot be demanded through intimidation. Power cannot be claimed through fear. True strength is quiet, persistent, and unshakable. And tonight, you are witnessing it firsthand." Daniel's shoulders tensed, the slight quiver in his jaw betraying the panic rising inside him. He had always thrived on appearances, on control, on manipulation. But those tools had failed him tonight. He was exposed, stripped of the illusion, and unable to regain his footing. I took a deliberate step closer, microphone in hand, lowering it slightly so my voice carried with both authority and precision. "You may have expected me to cower, to plead, to step aside. But that is not who I am. And it will never be who I am. Every decision, every boundary, every step I take forward is mine, fully mine." The guests were silent, their attention riveted. Some were nodding, some exchanging whispered words, but all were absorbing the weight of the truth I had delivered. Daniel, meanwhile, remained paralyzed, realizing too late that he had miscalculated entirely. "And Daniel," I said, my voice dropping slightly, almost intimate, letting the words land with subtle finality, "this is not a punishment. It's a revelation. For you, for me, and for everyone here. The person you thought you could dismiss, the woman you believed would remain silent, has finally taken her rightful place. Not in your shadow. Not under your control. But fully, unapologetically, in her own light." I stepped back slightly, letting the power of my words settle across the room. Daniel tried one last time, opening his mouth, but no sound came out. He realized that any attempt to reclaim control now would only deepen the exposure, the humiliation, the undeniable truth of my authority. I straightened, lifting the microphone with a calm, deliberate motion, letting the silence stretch a beat longer. The room felt different now, charged with clarity, filled with the quiet awe of witnesses who had just seen a transformation, a reclamation of power, a woman who refused to be dismissed. "And this," I concluded, my voice measured, deliberate, and unshakable, "is only the beginning of the life I will lead from this moment forward. Strong. Clear. Independent. And fully mine." The room remained silent for a heartbeat longer, then whispers began to ripple through the guests. Daniel remained frozen, fully aware that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and that the woman he had underestimated for 25 years had finally claimed her place. And for the first time I smiled, truly, completely, and unapologetically, knowing that nothing could take this moment from me. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. The guests were still processing what had just happened. Some whispered to one another, trying to piece together the woman they had known quietly with the force standing before them now. Others simply stared, captivated, unable to look away. And Daniel, he stood there, frozen, a mixture of fury and disbelief shadowing his features. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the calm in my chest radiate outward. Tonight, I said, my voice steady, is not about humiliation. It's not about revenge. It's about clarity, honesty, and reclaiming what has always been mine, my life, my choices, and my dignity. I let the words hang in the air. Daniel's mouth opened, closed, then opened again as if to argue, to protest, to command, but I was done listening. I held my ground, letting my gaze meet his with unwavering certainty. For years, I continued, pacing slowly now, microphone in hand, I have watched you make decisions as if they controlled everything around you. As if appearances, charm, and influence gave you the right to dictate my life. But they don't. Never did. And tonight, everyone here is witnessing the truth. A few guests shifted in their seats, some leaning in to catch every word, some nodding subtly in understanding. They could feel it too, the unmistakable weight of power shifting in the room, the authority that I had claimed, the undeniable reality that I would no longer be dismissed. You thought you could break me with a few words, a dramatic announcement, and the illusion of control, I said, my voice calm but sharp, precise. But what you fail to realize, Daniel, is that true strength is patient. It observes, it calculates, it waits. And when the moment is right, it strikes with clarity, not chaos. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides, subtle tremors betraying the inner storm he could no longer contain. He had always relied on fear, manipulation, and appearances. But those tools had crumbled tonight, powerless against the force I had become. I stepped closer to him, my voice dropping slightly to let the weight of the words sink directly into him. Do you see it now? The truth you tried to hide, the reality you hoped to control, is standing right here, unshaken, fully awake, and completely beyond your influence. Guests shifted in their seats, some glancing around at one another, acknowledging the transformation they were witnessing. Some were silent, absorbing the lesson without words. Daniel, however, could only stare, realizing that every carefully built illusion had collapsed. You may have believed that youth, charm, or status gave you power over me, I said, my voice rising just enough to carry authority, but none of that matters. Power is not granted by manipulation or fear. It is earned, sustained, and defended through awareness, self-respect, and unwavering resolve. And tonight, I have demonstrated all three. The subtle hum of the room, the quiet rustle of dresses, soft shifting of chairs, was now a backdrop to the undeniable force of my words. Every pause, every deliberate gesture, every carefully chosen phrase added to the impact. And let's be honest, I added, letting my tone sharpen slightly, you spent 25 years trying to shape my life, assuming I would comply quietly, step aside politely, and let your whims dictate reality. But that assumption is gone. That narrative ends here. Daniel's lips pressed tightly together. His confidence, once effortless, was fractured. Every second he hesitated, every breath he struggled to contain, reinforced the power I had taken back. I am done standing silently, I said, letting the microphone catch the subtle resonance of my voice. Done pretending that small gestures, polite compliance, and quiet tolerance equate to weakness. Done allowing someone else's desires to define my life. From this moment on, every choice I make, every decision I claim, belongs to me. Fully. Absolutely. Unapologetically. I let the silence stretch, letting the room absorb the gravity of what I had said. Guests leaned in, some nodding, some whispering quietly, but all captivated by the force of truth I had claimed. Daniel, meanwhile, was frozen in place, unable to interject, unable to reclaim what had been lost. You may have expected me to crumble under public scrutiny, to retreat, to apologize, or to step aside quietly, I said, stepping closer, letting the weight of my presence dominate the room. But I am not that woman anymore. She is gone. In her place stands someone fully aware, fully present, and fully in control of her life. The room remained still, the energy charged, as if holding its breath for the next moment. Daniel's shoulders tensed, and I could see the panic flickering in his eyes, the realization that he had miscalculated entirely, and that any further attempt to assert control would only expose him further. I have spent decades building, observing, and understanding, I continued, my tone deliberate, measured, powerful. And tonight, I reclaim every moment, every choice, every ounce of power that was always rightfully mine. The woman you underestimated is standing here, fully alive, fully strong, and fully untouchable by your whims or arrogance. I allowed the room to feel the weight of my declaration, letting the subtle power in my posture, voice, and presence sink into every guest, every corner of the space. Daniel, however, was trapped in the reality he had created, a reality where control had slipped entirely from his grasp. And this, I concluded, my voice firm, resonant, and deliberate, is only the beginning of my life as it was always meant to be. Independent, unapologetic, and fully in my own power. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the faint shifting of the guests, the subtle intake of breath, and the quiet realization that a woman who had once been quiet, overlooked, and underestimated, had claimed her life, and her authority, completely, in front of everyone. And Daniel, for the first time in decades, could only stand and witness. Make sure to tell in the comments where you are listening from. I let that moment linger, letting him feel the full weight of the shift. Every breath he took seemed shallow, tentative, as if he were realizing that the control he thought he had spent 25 years building was gone, irretrievably. I did not rush. I never rushed. Power is in timing, in presence, in letting the other person understand exactly how little influence they now hold. I know this is uncomfortable for you, Daniel, I said calmly, almost kindly, letting each word land with precise intent. I know it feels strange to be exposed, stripped of the illusions you relied on, stripped of the narrative you controlled for decades. But that discomfort? That is reality. Guests were watching, silent but intensely aware, absorbing the magnitude of what was unfolding. Some whispered quietly to one another, but none dared interrupt. They could feel the tension radiating off Daniel, could sense the subtle panic as he realized just how completely his authority had evaporated. You see, I continued, moving slowly across the room, microphone steady in my hand, it is one thing to talk about control, to demand obedience, to pretend power. It is entirely another to understand what true strength looks like. And tonight, everyone here is witnessing that strength firsthand. I paused for a moment, letting the words resonate. Daniel's eyes flickered, darting around, searching for an ally, a friend, a distraction, anything, but the room remained still. He had no escape. And I made sure he knew it. You have underestimated me for far too long, I said, my voice rising slightly, commanding the space. You thought I would remain silent, that I would shrink, that I would quietly accept the limits you imposed. But assumptions, Daniel, are fragile things. And yours just shattered. Some guests shifted, their reactions varied, a few leaning in, intrigued and impressed, others frozen, trying to reconcile the quiet, composed woman they thought they knew with the force standing before them now. Daniel, however, could do nothing. He was exposed, powerless, and acutely aware of it. Do you see it? I asked softly, stepping closer, letting my presence dominate without aggression. Do you feel the consequences of trying to control someone who has finally realized her own worth? This isn't punishment, Daniel. It is awareness. It is clarity. And it is the only thing you should have feared all along. I let the silence stretch again, every second reinforcing the lesson. He wanted to speak, to reclaim some ground, but I didn't let him. I raised my hand slightly, letting the microphone carry my voice clearly and deliberately across the room. For 25 years, I said, my tone deliberate, measured, you built a world where appearances mattered more than truth. Where charm and influence disguised neglect and arrogance. But tonight, the veil is gone. And the truth? The truth is that I am untouchable by your whims, your anger, or your past illusions of control. I saw a flicker of realization cross Daniel's face. He understood, at least partially, that every word I spoke reinforced the power I had taken back. Every sentence was a boundary, every pause a demonstration of authority. I am done tolerating manipulation, subtle humiliation, or hidden agendas, I continued, pacing slowly, letting my movement emphasize the weight of my words. I am done shrinking, apologizing, or allowing someone else's ego to dictate my life. From this moment forward, every decision I make, every step I take, is mine. Fully, absolutely, without hesitation. The guests were silent now, captivated, witnessing a transformation few could fully comprehend. Daniel's attempts to regain composure were obvious yet futile. Every twitch, every glance, every faltering gesture reinforced the reality of the shift that had taken place. You may have thought this moment would embarrass me, diminish me, or make me retreat, I said, letting my tone cut sharply through the tension. But it has done the opposite. It has revealed my strength, my awareness, and my ability to stand unwavering in the face of someone who once believed they had total control. Daniel's lips pressed together tightly, the subtle tremor in his hands betraying his inner storm. He had underestimated me, assumed my compliance, and assumed that silence equated to weakness. How wrong he had been. Tonight, you are seeing me as I truly am, I said, my gaze locking with his. Not the quiet, accommodating woman you thought you knew, but the one who finally claims her life, her choices, and her power without hesitation, doubt, or compromise. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Guests were leaning forward, whispering softly, some nodding in recognition, others frozen in awe. Daniel, however, was still trapped, unable to respond, fully aware that the balance had shifted permanently. This is not the end of our story, I continued, my voice deliberate, calm, yet carrying undeniable force. It is the beginning of a new chapter, one where I lead, decide, and define my life. Where I no longer allow anyone else's whims to dictate my reality. And that includes you, Daniel. You are no longer in charge here. I let the room absorb my words fully, letting the authority in my stance, the clarity in my voice, and the unwavering gaze all serve as a final, undeniable demonstration. Daniel opened his mouth once more, perhaps to protest, but the silence and the truth of my presence made words impossible. And to everyone here, I added, looking around the room with measured intensity, let this night be a reminder, strength is quiet, deliberate, and unshakable. Power is earned, respected, and never given away lightly. And tonight, that lesson is clear to all who witness it. I stepped back slightly, allowing the room to settle into the weight of the moment. Daniel's posture remained tense, his confidence shattered, his control gone. I had reclaimed everything I had allowed him to diminish, and the room, every witness, could see it. And in that charged silence, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about me or Daniel. This was about showing what it means to stand fully in your own life, to claim your power, and to ensure that no one, ever, could take it from you again. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the room feel the weight of every word I had spoken. The guests remained silent, captivated, sensing the transformation that had taken place. And Daniel, he was still frozen, unable to speak, trapped in a moment that revealed every miscalculation he had made over the years. You know, I said, letting the microphone carry my calm authority, there's a misconception that silence equals submission. That patience equals weakness. But that's not the case. Silence can be preparation. Patience can be strategy. And tonight, that patience has led to clarity, a clarity that no one can deny. I glanced around the room, making subtle eye contact with several guests, letting them feel the significance of the moment. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the realization that the woman they thought they knew had become something far more formidable. Daniel's hands clenched slightly at his sides. He wanted to speak, to argue, to assert some form of dominance, but he had lost the timing, the leverage, the narrative. Everything he had counted on had shifted, irrevocably. You may have thought that 25 years of shared life gave you control over me, I continued, pacing slowly, letting my steps punctuate each statement. But control is an illusion. Influence is temporary. Respect, strength, and authority are earned. And tonight, I am standing fully in all three. Some guests nodded subtly, others whispered quietly, all of them caught in the tension and revelation unfolding before them. Daniel's face, meanwhile, was a study in disbelief, realization, and a touch of fear, finally seeing the consequences of underestimating me. I've spent years navigating your ego, your demands, your expectations, I said, letting my voice carry evenly across the room. And while I may have appeared quiet, accommodating, and patient, I was always aware. Always calculating. Always preparing. And now, Daniel, you are seeing the result of that preparation. I stopped, letting my words hang, giving the room time to absorb the shift. Guests leaned in, some eyes wide in amazement, others in quiet understanding. Daniel tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, swallowed by the reality that he had misjudged me completely. This isn't just a confrontation, I said, my voice steady, measured, and sharp. It's a declaration. A declaration that I am no longer willing to be dismissed, belittled, or treated as anything less than I am. And that starts here, tonight, in front of everyone who matters, with the undeniable truth of who I am and what I deserve. I stepped closer, letting the movement emphasize my presence, my authority, my unshakable position. Daniel's eyes flickered, darting around the room, searching for some escape, some ally, some argument, but none existed. He was exposed, powerless, and fully aware of it. You may have assumed that appearances, charm, or status could control my choices, I said, letting the words resonate, but true power isn't granted by superficial qualities. It comes from clarity, self-respect, and courage, the courage to reclaim what is rightfully yours. And tonight, I am claiming mine. The guests were silent but fully engaged, feeling the intensity, the authority, the inevitability of my presence. Daniel's attempts at maintaining composure were futile, each moment emphasized the shift, the loss of his control, and the reclamation of my life. Let's be honest, I continued, my tone deliberate, cutting through the tension, you have spent years believing that fear, charm, and manipulation were enough to maintain dominance. But you have miscalculated entirely. You cannot control me. You cannot diminish me. You cannot dictate my life any longer. I paused again, letting the silence reinforce the power of the declaration. Daniel's posture remained stiff, his expression tight with frustration and dawning realization. He had assumed compliance, assumed submission, assumed that my silence meant weakness, but tonight proved otherwise. I am done shrinking, done accommodating, done pretending that your whims matter more than my own reality, I said, pacing slowly, letting each word hit precisely. From this moment forward, every choice, every decision, every step I take is mine. Fully mine. Absolutely mine. And nothing you say or do can change that. The room seemed to collectively exhale, the tension vibrating through every guest. Some whispered softly to each other, impressed by the unwavering strength I displayed. Others simply watched, stunned into stillness by the power of the woman standing before them. Daniel tried one last time, opening his mouth to speak, but the words never came. The truth of my presence, the authority I had reclaimed, and the clarity of my declarations had left him mute, fully aware that the balance of power had shifted permanently. And this, everyone here should understand, I concluded, lifting my chin slightly, letting my gaze sweep across the room, is not just a personal victory. It is a testament to the strength, clarity, and courage that anyone can claim when they refuse to be silenced, dismissed, or underestimated. And tonight, Daniel has learned that lesson firsthand. I let the words settle, letting the room absorb the weight and finality of the declaration. Guests were still, captivated, and Daniel was frozen, exposed, and powerless. And in that moment, I knew, nothing could take this back. Nothing could erase the clarity, the power, the strength I had claimed. and my life, finally, was completely, unapologetically mine. Make sure to tell in the comments where you are listening from. I felt a profound sense of liberation wash over me, one that was as much internal as it was reflected in the eyes of everyone present. The room had shifted with me. Daniel, once so sure of his control, was now a man confronted by the undeniable truth of his miscalculations. And I, for the first time in decades, stood entirely untethered from his authority. I let the silence stretch for a moment, allowing the weight of my words, my presence, and the undeniable reality of the shift to settle. Then, slowly, deliberately, I began to speak again. You see, I said, my voice calm but cutting through the tension like a blade, real strength doesn't need to announce itself through intimidation. It doesn't require dramatic gestures or theatrics. It shows up quietly, decisively, and with full clarity. And tonight, that strength is undeniable. Guests leaned forward, their attention unwavering. Some whispered to one another, some nodded subtly, but all were fully engaged, witnessing the transformation firsthand. Daniel's attempts to gather composure were obvious, yet entirely futile. Every glance, every twitch, every subtle movement reminded everyone that the balance had shifted completely. You may have spent years believing that dominance could be claimed through charm, status, or appearances, I continued, pacing slowly, letting my steps resonate, but dominance over a life, over a person, is an illusion if the other party knows their own worth. And I know mine, Daniel. I have always known it. And tonight, I claim it fully. I stopped, letting my gaze sweep across the room, catching eyes with guests who had known me for years. Their expressions mirrored recognition, surprise, and, in some cases, admiration. The energy in the room was electric, alive with the tension of revelation and empowerment. Daniel's eyes flickered, searching for some argument, some defense, some way to regain control, but there was none. He was exposed in front of everyone he had ever assumed he could manipulate, and the realization of that vulnerability was written across his face. I've spent decades navigating expectations, compromises, and the subtle pressures of a life shared with someone who believed they owned the narrative, I said, my voice steady, deliberate, unwavering. And while I may have appeared quiet, accommodating, and patient, I was always aware. Always calculating. And tonight, the patience, clarity, and preparation culminate in truth. I stepped closer, letting my presence dominate the space, allowing Daniel to feel the full impact of my authority. You wanted someone younger. Someone more compliant. Someone you thought you could control, I said, my voice measured, cutting precisely. But I am neither younger nor compliant nor submissive. I am my own person. And from this moment forward, I am fully, unequivocally, unapologetically in control of my own life. Guests were completely silent now, watching with rapt attention. The energy was tangible, thick with awareness of the transformation that had unfolded. Daniel tried once more to interject, but I raised a finger subtly, letting him know words were unnecessary, and powerless in the face of what had been revealed. This is not about punishment, I continued, my tone calm but with an undeniable authority. It is about recognition. Recognition that a life shared does not equate to ownership. Recognition that respect, dignity, and autonomy cannot be taken by force or charm. Recognition that the woman you thought you controlled has been awake, aware, and fully capable of claiming her power all along. I let the words linger, scanning the room, observing the subtle nods, the quiet murmurs, the astonished faces. Daniel's tension was palpable, a testament to the irrevocable shift that had taken place. He had relied on assumptions, on fear, on appearances, but those tools had failed him tonight. Every step I take from this moment forward is mine, I said firmly, letting each word land deliberately. Every choice I make, every decision I claim, every boundary I set, belongs to me. Fully. Absolutely. And nothing you say, Daniel, can change that. I paused, letting the silence stretch, allowing the room to absorb the full impact. Guests were captivated, sensing the magnitude of the moment. Daniel's posture was rigid, his face pale, the panic in his eyes growing as he realized how completely he had misjudged me. You thought this night would diminish me, I said, lowering my voice slightly, letting it resonate with calm authority, but instead, it has revealed me. Not a timid, accommodating woman. Not someone who would quietly comply. But a woman fully awake, fully aware, and fully in her own power. I stepped back slightly, letting the room breathe, letting the full magnitude of the transformation settle into the minds of everyone present. Daniel, meanwhile, was trapped in recognition. He had underestimated me for decades, and now the truth was unavoidable. And to everyone here, I said, lifting my chin slightly, letting my gaze sweep across the room with deliberate authority, let this night serve as a reminder. Strength is quiet, calculated, and undeniable. Power is claimed by those who know their worth, not by those who believe fear and manipulation create dominance. And tonight, you all have witnessed that lesson firsthand. I let the room absorb the moment fully. Guests remained captivated, some whispering softly, others frozen in awe. Daniel, however, was immobile, realizing with stark clarity that everything he assumed about control, authority, and dominance had been overturned in front of everyone. And in that moment, I felt it fully, the liberation, the power, the clarity of reclaiming my life entirely, unapologetically, without fear, without hesitation, and without compromise. Tonight, nothing could take this from me. Make sure to tell in the comments where you are listening from. I stood there for a moment, letting the room feel the full weight of my presence, my words, and the undeniable reality of the shift that had occurred. Daniel, once so confident, so commanding, so sure of his power, now looked like a man stripped of every assumption he had ever held. And I was fully awake, fully aware, fully in my own power. The guests remained still, absorbed by the intensity of the moment. Some whispered quietly, some leaned forward, some simply stared, captivated by the woman who had once seemed quiet, accommodating, and invisible. All of them were witnessing transformation in its rawest form. I began speaking again, my voice calm yet sharp, deliberate, and unwavering. You may have thought this night would embarrass me, silence me, or force me into retreat, I said, letting each word land with precision, but you were wrong. Every insult, every slight, every attempt to control me only prepared me for this moment. And now, Daniel, the reality is clear, I am unstoppable. Daniel's jaw tightened, his face pale, and his hands fidgeted slightly at his sides. He had tried to command, to manipulate, to assert control, but all of it had failed. The audience could feel it, the fragile illusion of authority he had relied on for decades had crumbled entirely. I have spent years navigating your ego, your whims, and your relentless desire to dominate, I continued, pacing slowly, letting each deliberate step reinforce my presence. And while I may have appeared patient, quiet, or accommodating, I was always aware. Always calculating. And tonight, my awareness becomes action, my patience becomes power, my clarity becomes truth. The guests' eyes followed me as I moved, sensing the intensity, the authority, the undeniable shift in energy. Daniel's attempts at regaining composure were futile. Every subtle movement, every strained expression revealed the weight of his miscalculation. You may have assumed that appearances, charm, and status granted you control over my life, I said, letting the words resonate, but true control has always been in my hands. My voice. My choices. My boundaries. And tonight, that control is absolute, undeniable, and irreversible. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Guests were captivated, hanging on every word, every gesture, every deliberate breath. Daniel could do nothing. He could only witness the woman he underestimated finally claiming her life entirely. Every step I take from now on, I said, my voice steady, deliberate, and filled with authority, is mine. Every decision I make, every boundary I set, every direction I choose, belongs to me. Fully. Unapologetically. And nothing you say or do can ever change that, Daniel. I let the microphone rest lightly in my hand, allowing the room to absorb the weight of the declaration. Every guest could feel it, the reclamation of a life, the assertion of authority, the quiet yet unmistakable force of someone who had finally stood fully in her own power. You may have believed that your charm, your influence, and your arrogance could dictate my reality, I continued, pacing slowly to reinforce the impact. But the reality is this: I am no longer the woman you assumed I was. I am aware, I am strong, and I am fully in control of my life. And that, Daniel, is something you cannot take away, manipulate, or undermine. The room was silent except for the subtle shifting of the guests, the faint intake of breath, the collective acknowledgement of the irreversible shift in authority. Daniel's face had grown tense, his posture rigid, his attempts to speak swallowed by the truth standing before him. And to everyone here, I said, letting my gaze sweep across the room, commanding attention, let this night be a reminder: strength is not loud or demanding. Power is not granted through fear, manipulation, or charm. True power is patient, deliberate, and unwavering. It is claimed by those who know their worth and refuse to be silenced, underestimated, or dismissed. And tonight, you have all witnessed that truth firsthand. I stepped back slightly, letting the energy settle, letting the silence speak. Daniel remained frozen, aware of every misstep, every assumption, every act of underestimation he had ever made. For the first time, he truly understood that control could not be forced, it could only be claimed. And for me, I said, lowering my voice just slightly, letting it resonate with calm finality, this is not the end. It is the beginning of a life lived fully, unapologetically, and entirely on my own terms. Every choice, every decision, every step I take from this moment forward belongs to me. Fully, without hesitation, without compromise, and without fear. Guests were still, captivated, some nodding subtly in acknowledgement, others whispering quietly, but all fully present to the profound shift that had taken place. Daniel could only watch, stripped of authority, stripped of illusions, stripped of control. I straightened fully, lifting my chin, holding the microphone with quiet confidence, and let the room feel the full impact of my presence. Tonight, I said, concluding with measured clarity, is proof that no one can diminish your life, your choices, or your strength if you are willing to claim it. I am that proof. And from this moment forward, my life is mine. Entirely, unapologetically, and forever. The room exhaled almost collectively, the tension finally breaking into quiet recognition and awe. Daniel's face reflected the finality of what he had just witnessed, the irreversible shift in power, and the undeniable truth: the woman he had underestimated for 25 years had claimed her life, and nothing, and no one, could take it back. And with that, I smiled, fully, unapologetically, completely, knowing that my life, my power, and my choices were finally, irrevocably mine. That was my story, my life, my choices, and my power finally reclaimed. If this inspired you, shocked you, or just left you speechless, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more real-life stories like mine. I really want to hear from you, so drop a comment below and tell me what you would do if you were in my shoes. And don't forget, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know which cities and countries are tuning in. Thank you for being here with me, for witnessing this moment, and remember, your life, your power, and your choices belong only to you. Never let anyone diminish that. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next story.